Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stirred the large pot of vegetable soup. The steam rose in thick clouds, filling his small apartment kitchen with the rich aroma of herbs and spices. Outside his window, the sprawling refugee camp stretched endlessly across the barren landscape of Kepler 442b, a planet that had become home to millions of displaced beings from across the galaxy. He had never expected his life to take this turn. 3 years ago, Marcus was just another chef working in a high-end restaurant in New Tokyo. Then the galactic refugee crisis hit, and suddenly Earth was opening its borders to alien species fleeing wars, famines, and planetary disasters. The United Earth government had established several refugee settlements on terraformed worlds, and Marcus had volunteered to help with food distribution. What he found on Kepler 442b broke his heart. Thousands of alien families living in cramped shelters, struggling to survive on minimal rations. The government-issued nutrition paste was technically sufficient to keep them alive, but it was flavorless, colorless, and utterly depressing. Marcus knew that food was more than just fuel for the body. It was comfort, culture, and hope. That's when he started cooking. Every morning, Marcus would wake before dawn and begin preparing meals with whatever ingredients he could gather. He traded his personal belongings for spices, bartered with supply ships for fresh vegetables, and even learned to forage for edible plants native to the planet. His small apartment became an unofficial kitchen, and word spread quickly through the camp that the human in Block 7 was giving away real food. The first aliens to visit him were a family of Zephyrians, tall blue-skinned beings with large expressive eyes. The parents were too proud to accept charity, but their 3 children were clearly malnourished. Marcus pretended he had made too much soup and convinced them to take some leftovers. The joy on those children's faces when they tasted real flavors, for the first time, made every hour of preparation worth it. Soon, a steady stream of alien children began visiting his apartment. There were the Quillen twins, small furry creatures who reminded him of teddy bears, always arriving together and sharing everything equally. The young Thraxian girl named Zix, whose species required a diet high in minerals, leading Marcus to experiment with nutrient-rich broths. And the silent Vorthan boy who never spoke but always helped clean up after meals. Communicating only through gentle chittering sounds, Marcus learned each child's dietary needs, cultural preferences, and food allergies. He discovered that Zephyrian children couldn't digest dairy, that Quillens had an almost supernatural love for anything sweet, and that Thraxians considered sharing a meal to be a sacred act of trust. He adapted his recipes accordingly, creating fusion dishes that honored each species' traditions while providing proper nutrition. The camp administrators initially tried to shut down his operation, citing health regulations and unauthorized food distribution, but when they saw the positive impact on the children's health and morale, they quietly looked the other way. Some even began donating ingredients from their personal supplies. Marcus developed a routine. Mornings were for preparation, cutting vegetables and preparing stocks. Afternoons were for cooking, usually 2 or 3 different dishes to accommodate various dietary requirements. Evenings were for serving, and these were the hours he treasured most. His small apartment would fill with children of all shapes, sizes, and colors, chattering in a dozen different languages as they enjoyed their meals. He learned basic phrases in their languages, picking up Zephyrian words for delicious and thank you, understanding Quillen expressions of joy, and recognizing the subtle body language that indicated satisfaction among the more reserved species. The children, in turn, began teaching him about their home worlds, their customs, and their dreams for the future. One evening, as Marcus served his signature multi-species stew to a group of 8 children, he noticed something peculiar. The Vorthan boy, who he had privately nicknamed Quiet, due to his shy nature, was being treated with unusual deference by the other children. They waited for him to taste the food first, offered him the choicest portions, and generally behaved as if he held some sort of special status. When Marcus asked about it, the Zephyrian girl, Lyra, explained in her broken English that Quiet's family was very important where they came from. She used a word in her own language that Marcus didn't recognize, but the reverent way she said it suggested significant respect. Marcus filed this information away but didn't think much of it. In his kitchen, all children were equal, regardless of their background. The seasons changed on Kepler 442b, and Marcus's informal feeding program continued to grow. He was now serving nearly 30 children daily, and his apartment had been expanded with donations from various species communities. The Zephyrians contributed advanced cooling systems for food storage, the Quillans provided efficient cooking implements, and the Thraxians helped with heavy lifting and construction. Marcus never asked for payment or recognition. He simply cooked because these children needed real food, real comfort, and real care. He watched them grow stronger, healthier, and happier with each passing day. Some had been skeletal when they first arrived. Now they were thriving. But he also noticed that Quiet's presence seemed to draw an unusual level of attention from camp security. Guards would often patrol near his apartment when the boy was visiting, and Marcus occasionally spotted official vehicles in the distance. He assumed it was standard protection for refugee children, not realizing that his small act of kindness was being monitored at the highest levels of galactic government. The children had become family to him. He learned their individual stories, their fears about the future, and their hopes of one day returning home or finding new homes. They taught him that kindness needed no translation, that a warm meal could bridge any cultural divide, and that the universe was far more connected than he had ever imagined. As winter approached on Kepler 442b, Marcus continued his daily routine, unaware that his simple acts of compassion were about to intersect with forces beyond his comprehension. In his mind, he was just a chef feeding hungry children. He had no idea that one of those children carried a secret that would change everything. The morning brought unexpected visitors to Marcus's apartment. He was preparing his usual breakfast service when 3 figures in formal attire appeared at his door. 2 were clearly security personnel, tall beings in dark uniforms that seemed to shimmer with integrated technology. The third was a Vorthan female, elegantly dressed in flowing robes that indicated high social status. Marcus opened the door, wiping flour from his hands on his apron. "Can I help you?" The Vorthan woman stepped forward, her large dark eyes scanning his modest kitchen setup. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "I am Ambassador Kethera. I believe you have been caring for my son." Understanding dawned on Marcus like a cold wave. Quiet, the shy little boy who helped clean dishes and never spoke above a whisper, was the son of an ambassador. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized he might have unknowingly violated some diplomatic protocol. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," Marcus began, but Ambassador Kethera raised a slender hand to stop him. "You misunderstand. I am not here to reprimand you. I am here to thank you." Her expression softened as she looked around the kitchen, taking in the multiple cooking stations, the carefully organized ingredients, and the small table where her son had shared countless meals. "My son speaks of you constantly. He calls you food giver in our language, which is a title of great respect among our people." Marcus felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by curiosity. "Ambassador, if you don't mind me asking, why is your son in the refugee camp? Surely diplomatic families have better accommodations?" The ambassador's expression grew complex, mixing pride with concern. "My son chose to stay with the other children. When we arrived on this planet, he saw their suffering and refused to accept privileged treatment. He said that if they must eat paste and sleep in shelters, then so would he. It is very characteristic of his nature." She moved deeper into the kitchen, examining the specialized cooking equipment that various alien communities had contributed. "My people have a saying: the measure of a leader is not in the power they wield, but in the service they provide. My son has been learning this lesson from you, though you did not know you were teaching it." Marcus began to understand the scope of what had been happening. That's why the other children treat him differently. They know who he is. They know who he will become. Ambassador Kethera corrected gently. "My son is not just any Vorthan child. He is heir to the throne of Vorth, next in line to rule our homeworld. But more than that, he is being groomed for leadership within the Galactic Council itself." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been casually feeding future galactic royalty vegetable soup and teaching him to wash dishes. "I had no idea. I just saw a hungry kid who needed a good meal." "Precisely," the ambassador said with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as approval. "You treated him exactly as you treated every other child. You saw his need, not his status. This has been invaluable for his development." She gestured to her security detail and they stepped back to give them privacy. "Marcus Chen, I have been observing your operation for several months. My intelligence reports describe a human who has single-handedly improved the health and morale of the entire refugee youth population. You have created something remarkable here. Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. I just cook food. Anyone could do what I'm doing. No, Ambassador Cathera said firmly. Anyone could distribute nutrition. What you have done is create community, hope, and healing. You have shown these children that they are valued, that their individual needs matter, and that someone cares enough to spend their own time and resources making their lives better. She moved to the window, looking out over the refugee camp. Do you know what the mortality rate was among refugee children before you began your program? 17% died within the first year, usually from malnutrition-related complications. Since you started cooking for them, that number has dropped to 0. Marcus stared at her in shock. 0. Not only are these children surviving, they are thriving. Their academic performance has improved, their social integration has accelerated, and their psychological evaluations show remarkable resilience. Food, it seems, was only part of what you were providing. You gave them dignity. The ambassador turned back to him, her expression serious. This is why I must make you an offer. The Galactic Council has been searching for solutions to the refugee crisis across 17 worlds. Traditional approaches have failed because they treat the symptoms rather than addressing the fundamental need for community and belonging. Your model could be replicated across the galaxy. Marcus felt overwhelmed. I'm just one person. I can't feed children on 17 planets. Not personally, no. But you could train others. You could develop protocols, share your methods, and oversee implementation. The Council is prepared to offer you a position as Director of Refugee Nutrition and Community Integration, with unlimited resources and full diplomatic authority. The offer was staggering. But Marcus found himself thinking about the children who would arrive that afternoon expecting their usual meal. What about the kids here? I can't just abandon them. Ambassador Cathara smiled, and for the first time Marcus saw where her son had inherited his gentle nature. Your kitchen would become the flagship program, the training center where other volunteers learn your methods. These children would not lose you. They would become part of something much larger. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of small feet running up the stairs interrupted them. The door burst open and Quiet rushed in, followed by Lyra and the Quillen twins. They stopped short when they saw the formal visitors, but Quiet immediately ran to his mother, chittering excitedly in the Vorthan language. Ambassador Cathara listened, then translated for Marcus. He says you promised to teach him how to make bread today. He's very excited because he wants to share the recipe with his friends. Marcus looked at the boy, seeing him with new eyes but finding that nothing fundamental had changed. Important lineage or not, Quiet was still a child who enjoyed learning to cook and wanted to share that joy with others. The bread lesson is still on, Marcus said, kneeling to the boy's level. But first I need to talk with your mother about something very important. As the children settled at their usual table, chattering about their morning adventures in the camp, Marcus realized that his answer had already formed. The scope might be overwhelming, but the principle remained the same. Hungry children needed food, care, and community. Whether that was 30 kids in one kitchen or millions across the galaxy, the approach would be identical. He looked at Ambassador Cathara and nodded. Tell me more about this program. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime were unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. The massive amphitheater could hold representatives from over 300 species, each section equipped with atmosphere controls, gravity adjustments, and translation systems. As he stood at the central podium, Marcus felt incredibly small and distinctly human among the vast array of alien dignitaries. Ambassador Cathara had prepared him for this moment over the past 3 weeks. After accepting the position, Marcus had been whisked away from Kepler 442b to the galactic capital for orientation and planning. The transition had been jarring, moving from his simple kitchen to the most important governmental body in known space. Representatives of the Galactic Council, Marcus began, his voice amplified by the translation system that converted his words into hundreds of languages simultaneously. 6 months ago, I was just a chef who saw hungry children and decided to cook for them. Today, I stand before you as proof that the smallest acts of kindness can have the largest consequences. The amphitheater was quiet, except for the subtle sounds of various species' breathing patterns, and the occasional clicking or chittering that served as nonverbal communication. Marcus had learned to read these sounds during his orientation, understanding that he held the attention of beings whose civilizations spanned millennia. The refugee crisis affects 847 million beings across our galaxy, he continued, referencing the statistics Ambassador Cathera had drilled into him. Traditional aid focuses on survival, shelter, basic nutrition, medical care, and eventual relocation. These are necessary, but they are not sufficient. Refugees don't just need to survive. They need to live, to hope, and to maintain their dignity while displaced from everything they've ever known. He activated the holographic display that showed images from his kitchen on Kepler 442b children of various species sharing meals, laughing together, helping with cooking preparations. The contrast between these scenes and typical refugee camp footage was stark. Food is universal, Marcus said, warming to his subject. Every species I've encountered has cultural traditions around meals, celebrations involving special dishes, and emotional connections to the flavors of home. When we strip that away and provide only functional nutrition, we don't just feed the body poorly. We starve the soul. A Thraxian representative stood, their rocky exterior gleaming under the chamber's lights. Director Chen, your results on Kepler 442b are impressive, but how do you propose scaling this approach? The resource requirements alone would be astronomical. Marcus had anticipated this question. Actually, Counselor, the resource requirements are lower than our current approach. When children are properly nourished and emotionally stable, medical costs drop dramatically. When families maintain cultural connections through food, social integration happens faster, reducing long-term support needs. When communities form around shared meals, crime rates and social unrest decrease significantly. He clicked to the next slide, showing comparative cost analyses. The initial investment is higher, but the long-term savings are substantial. More importantly, successful integration means these refugees become productive citizens faster, contributing to the economies of their host worlds rather than remaining dependent on aid. A delicate voice spoke from the Zephyrian section. What about dietary compatibility? Our nutritional requirements differ significantly from humans and most other species. That's exactly why this approach works, Marcus replied enthusiastically. Instead of trying to create one-size-fits-all solutions, we customize everything. Each kitchen facility would have specialists trained in the dietary needs, cultural preferences, and food traditions of the species they serve. We don't just feed refugees. We help them maintain their cultural identity while adapting to new environments. Ambassador Cathera stood to address the council. Honored representatives, I have seen this program's effects firsthand. My son has been participating for 8 months, and the transformation has been remarkable. Not just in his physical health, but in his understanding of leadership, community, and service. The children in this program are developing skills and perspectives that will serve them well regardless of their future paths. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the ambassador. Her support had been crucial in bringing this proposal to the council's attention, and her son's involvement gave the program a credibility that Marcus alone could never have achieved. A new voice joined the discussion, this one carrying the deep resonance characteristic of the ancient ethereal species. Director Chen, your proposal assumes that different species can coexist peacefully in these communal dining arrangements. Our experience suggests that cultural conflicts often intensify when beings are stressed and displaced. This was the question Marcus had hoped for, because it led to the heart of his philosophy. Counselor, you're absolutely right that cultural conflicts increase under stress. But I've observed something interesting in my kitchen. When children from different species work together to prepare food, when they share meals and learn about each other's traditions, those conflicts don't disappear, but they transform into curiosity and understanding. He switched to a video feed showing Quillan children teaching Vorthan children how to prepare their traditional honey cakes, while Zephyrian youngsters demonstrated their intricate tea ceremony. Food is a bridge. It gives beings something concrete to share, a way to express their culture that others can literally taste and appreciate. Instead of abstract cultural differences, we have tangible experiences that build empathy. The session continued for 2 hours, with representatives asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, training protocols, quality control measures, and success metrics. Marcus answered as best he could, But he knew that Ambassador Cathara and her team of experts were providing the technical details that made this vision practical. Finally, the council leader, an ancient being whose species Marcus had never encountered before, called for preliminary discussion. The chair recognizes that this proposal represents a fundamental shift in our approach to refugee assistance. We will now enter closed deliberation. Director Chen, you will be notified of our decision within 1 standard galactic day. As Marcus left the chamber, Ambassador Cathara walked beside him through the gleaming corridors of the council complex. You did well, she said simply. Your passion is evident, and passion is often more persuasive than perfect data. Do you think they'll approve it? Marcus asked, still feeling the weight of addressing the galaxy's most powerful governing body. I think they'll be fools if they don't, she replied. But more importantly, I think you've already proven that this works. The question now is whether they have the courage to try something new on a galactic scale. That evening, Marcus stood on his temporary quarters balcony, looking out over Nexus Prime's cityscape. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds lived and worked together here, creating a civilization that would have been impossible for any single species to achieve. If his proposal was approved, refugee camps across the galaxy might become incubators for similar cooperation. He thought about the children back on Kepler 442b, probably sitting down for their evening meal right now under the supervision of the volunteers he'd trained before leaving. Whether the council approved his program or not, those children would continue to be fed, cared for, and treated with dignity. But if the council said yes, millions of other children would have the same opportunity. The notification came at dawn, delivered by a ceremonial messenger whose crystalline form chimed softly as it approached Marcus's quarters. The Galactic Council had reached their decision, and Ambassador Cathara was requested to escort Director Chen to the private chambers for the announcement. Marcus tried to read the ambassador's expression as they walked through the council complex, but her diplomatic training made her thoughts unreadable. The private chambers were smaller than the main amphitheater, designed for intimate discussions among senior leadership. Only 12 representatives were present, including the council leader and the heads of the major species coalitions. Director Chen, the council leader began, their ancient voice carrying harmonics that suggested great age and wisdom. The Galactic Council has deliberated extensively on your proposal. We find ourselves in the unusual position of approving something that challenges every traditional approach to refugee assistance. Marcus felt his heart skip. But the council leader wasn't finished. However, we have concerns about implementation speed and scale. You propose establishing 847 facilities across 17 worlds within 2 standard years. Our analysts suggest this timeline is optimistic. The Zephyrian coalition leader leaned forward. We propose a compromise. Immediate approval for 30 pilot facilities across 6 worlds, with full implementation, contingent on demonstrated success within 1 year. This allows for proper testing while minimizing risk. Marcus felt both elation and frustration. 30 facilities would help thousands of children, but millions more would continue suffering under the current system. Before he could respond, Ambassador Cathara spoke. Honored leaders, with respect, Director Chen's model has already been tested. 8 months of continuous operation, 0 mortality, measurable improvements across all metrics. How much more proof is required while children suffer? The Thraxian representative's rocky exterior shifted, indicating discomfort. Ambassador Cathara, we appreciate your advocacy, but galactic policy cannot be based on a single small-scale example, regardless of its success. Then don't base it on one example, a new voice interrupted from the chamber's entrance. Marcus turned to see Quiet, now dressed in formal Vorthan diplomatic robes, walking into the room with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to high-level meetings. Prince Kelvaran, the council leader acknowledged with obvious surprise. This is an unexpected honor. Marcus stared at the boy he'd known as shy and silent, watching as Quiet transformed into his true identity. Prince Kelvaran, heir to the Vorthan throne and future member of the Galactic Council, commanded the room's attention with quiet authority. Honored leaders, Prince Kelvaran said, his voice carrying the same resonant quality as his mother's but with youthful passion behind it. You debate implementation timelines while refugee children die preventable deaths. Director Chen's program isn't just about food. It's about proving that different species can coexist peacefully, learn from each other, and build something better together. The prince activated a personal holographic display, showing images Marcus had never seen before. These are my friends from Kepler 442b, Lyra, who taught me Zephyrian poetry while we cooked together. The Quillen twins, who showed me that sharing everything equally makes everyone stronger. Zix, who helped me understand that true leadership means serving others before yourself. The images shifted to show the children working together, playing together, growing stronger and healthier together. This is what Director Chen created with simple kindness and good food. Now imagine this multiplied across the galaxy. Imagine an entire generation of refugee children who grow up believing that cooperation between species is natural, that helping others is normal, that the galaxy is fundamentally good. Prince Kelverin turned to address Marcus directly. Director Chen, you probably don't know this, but you've been feeding the future leaders of 3 different worlds. Lyra is the daughter of the Zephyrian Prime Minister. The Quillen twins are descended from their species' founding family. Several other children in your program carry similar significance. Marcus felt the room's atmosphere shift as the implications became clear. The council wasn't just deciding about refugee assistance, they were potentially shaping the next generation of galactic leadership. These children will remember who showed them kindness when they were vulnerable, Prince Kelverin continued. They'll remember that a human named Marcus Chen saw them as individuals worthy of care and respect. When they take positions of power in 20 or 30 years, they'll remember the lessons learned around your kitchen table. The ethereal representative spoke, their voice carrying newfound interest. Prince Kelverin, are you suggesting that this program could influence future interspecies relations? I'm not suggesting it, Counselor. I'm stating it as fact. The children in Director Chen's program are developing friendships and perspectives that transcend species boundaries. They're learning that differences in appearance, culture, and biology don't prevent cooperation and mutual respect. Ambassador Cathara stepped forward to support her son's argument. The diplomatic implications alone justify full implementation. We're not just saving lives today, we're potentially preventing conflicts for generations to come. The council leader was quiet for long moments, their ancient wisdom processing this new dimension of the proposal. Director Chen, if we approve full implementation, what guarantees can you provide that quality will be maintained across hundreds of facilities? Marcus found his voice strengthened by Prince Kelverin's support. The same guarantee I gave those first children who came to my kitchen, that every single person involved will be trained to see refugees as individuals with dignity, needs, and potential. That every meal will be prepared with respect for cultural traditions and nutritional requirements. That every facility will be a place where different species can come together in peace. And if some facilities fail to meet these standards, the Thraxian representative asked, then we fix them, Marcus said simply. We don't abandon the program. We improve it. Just like I learned to adjust recipes when I discovered new dietary needs, we adapt and overcome challenges as they arise. Prince Kelverin added, honored leaders, the cost of doing this wrong is measured in resources and reputation. The cost of not doing it at all is measured in lives and lost opportunities for peace. The council leader called for a brief recess, during which the representatives huddled in small groups, debating rapidly in languages Marcus couldn't follow. When they reconvened, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Director Chen, the council leader, announced, the Galactic Council hereby approves full implementation of the Integrated Refugee Nutrition and Community Program, with immediate authorization for 200 facilities across 12 worlds, expanding to full scale within 18 months. Marcus felt his knees weaken with relief and overwhelming responsibility. 200 facilities meant potentially reaching 500,000 refugee children within the first year. Furthermore, the council leader continued, Prince Kelverin will serve as special youth ambassador for the program, helping to ensure that the perspectives and needs of young refugees are represented at the highest levels of implementation. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out, Prince Kelverin approached Marcus. For a moment, the formal diplomatic bearing dropped away, and Marcus saw the shy boy who had helped wash dishes in his kitchen. Thank you, the prince said quietly, for treating me like just another hungry kid who needed a good meal. Marcus smiled, placing a hand on the young prince's shoulder. That's exactly what you were. The fact that you're also going to help rule the galaxy just makes the meals we shared a little more interesting in hindsight. The work ahead would be enormous, but Marcus felt ready for it. After all, the principle remained the same. See the need, provide care with dignity, and treat every individual as worthy of respect and kindness. Whether that was one kitchen or 1,000, the approach would be identical. 18 months later, Marcus stood in the central command center of the Galactic Refugee Integration Network, watching real-time data streams from 347 active facilities across 14 worlds. Each dot of light on the massive holographic display represented thousands of children receiving proper nutrition, cultural education, and community support. The transformation had been faster and more successful than anyone had predicted. What started as Marcus cooking soup in his apartment had become the largest humanitarian program in galactic history, serving over 2 million refugees daily. But success had brought unexpected challenges. Director Chen, called Dr. Yixara, a brilliant Zephyrian nutritionist who had become Marcus's deputy director, were receiving concerning reports from the Tau Ceti facility. Local authorities are requesting increased security presence. Marcus frowned, moving to the communication station. Tau Ceti housed refugees from the recent Scorpius conflict, including many species that had been enemies for generations. The facility served 45,000 refugees, making it one of their largest operations. "What's the nature of the security concern?" Marcus asked. "Apparently children from the Kraltek and Vixani species have been collaborating," Dr. Yixara reported carefully. "Their parents are distressed because these species have been at war for over 3 centuries. Marcus almost smiled. This was exactly the kind of problem he hoped the program would create. "Are the children fighting?" "No, sir. They're teaching each other traditional recipes and have formed mixed cooking teams." The facility director reports unprecedented cooperation and friendship between the groups. "Then why do we need security?" Dr. Yixara's expression grew complex. "Because some of the adult refugees view this cooperation as cultural betrayal. There have been protests, demands to separate the children, threats to remove families from the program entirely." This was the challenge Marcus had feared but never fully anticipated. The children were adapting and forming bonds exactly as hoped, but their parents remained trapped in generational conflicts that their children were learning to transcend. Before Marcus could respond, Prince Kelveran's voice came through the communication system. "Director Chen, I'm at the Tau Ceti facility now. I think you should see this for yourself." Within hours, Marcus was aboard a high-speed transport to Tau Ceti, accompanied by Ambassador Cathera and a diplomatic team. The journey gave him time to review the facilities, reports, and understand the scope of the situation developing there. The Tau Ceti Refugee Integration Center was a sprawling complex built into the side of a mountain, designed to accommodate multiple atmospheric and gravitational requirements. As Marcus's transport approached, he could see distinct sections where different species had naturally segregated themselves, except for one area where the boundaries seemed fluid and mixed. Prince Kelvaran met them at the landing platform, now 17 years old and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had spent 2 years traveling between refugee facilities as the program's youth ambassador. "The situation is more complex than the report suggested," he said without preamble. "The children aren't just cooperating. They're creating something entirely new." As they walked through the facility, Marcus saw what the prince meant. In the traditional areas, adult refugees maintained the strict cultural and species divisions they had known their entire lives. But in the central dining and kitchen areas, children moved freely between groups, speaking mixtures of languages and wearing clothing that blended elements from multiple cultures. Director Chen, a young Kraltek child, approached, her scaled hide decorated with Vixani-style jewelry. "Look what we made." She held up a dish that combined traditional Kraltek spices with Vixani cooking techniques, creating something that belonged to neither culture and both simultaneously. Behind her, a group of children from 6 different species worked together, preparing the evening meal, chattering in a pidgin language that incorporated elements from all their native tongues. They moved with practiced coordination, each contributing skills from their own cultural background to create meals that would have been impossible for any single species to conceive. "This is what has the adults frightened," Prince Kelveran explained quietly. "Their children are creating a new culture, one that transcends the boundaries their parents have died to maintain." Marcus watched a Vixani boy teaching a group of younger children how to weave traditional patterns, while a Kraltech girl demonstrated the proper way to harvest nutrient-rich fungi that grew in their section of the facility. Neither activity belonged exclusively to their respective species anymore. Director Chen, an adult voice called out. Marcus turned to see a group of Kraltech and Vixani parents approaching, their expressions tense but not hostile. "We need to speak with you about our children." The ensuing conversation took place in one of the facility's meeting rooms, with Marcus, Prince Kelverin, and the facility director on one side, and roughly 20 concerned parents on the other. The universal translator worked overtime as emotions ran high. "Our children are forgetting who they are," said a Kraltech mother, her voice tight with concern. "They speak our language mixed with enemy words. They prepare food that no Kraltech has ever eaten. They wear decorations that belong to those who have killed our people for generations." A Vixani father nodded in agreement. "We did not escape our homeworld so our children could become neither Vixani nor Kraltech. We came here to preserve our culture, not to watch it disappear into some hybrid abomination." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. These parents had fled war, lost everything, and now felt they were losing their children's cultural identity as well. But he also saw something they couldn't yet perceive. "I understand your fear," Marcus said carefully. "Culture is precious and you've sacrificed everything to preserve it for your children. But may I ask you something? What did you hope your children would have that you didn't?" The question surprised them. A Vixani mother answered hesitantly, "Peace, safety, a future without war." "Freedom to grow and learn without fear," added a Kraltech father. "Opportunities we never had," said another parent. Marcus nodded. "And are your children safer here than they were on your homeworlds?" "Yes," several parents admitted. "Are they healthier, better educated, and happier?" "Yes, but are they learning skills that will help them succeed regardless of where they eventually settle?" "Yes, but they're not learning to be Kraltech or Vixani," the first mother insisted. Marcus leaned forward. "What if they're learning to be something better? What if they're learning to be beings who can appreciate Kraltech culture and Vixani culture and a dozen others, without needing to hate or fear any of them?" Prince Kelverin stood, addressing the parents with the authority of his position. "I am Vorthon, heir to an ancient throne trained from birth in the traditions of my people. But I'm also someone who learned to cook Zephyrian soup, to weave Quillan patterns, and to understand Thraxian poetry. I haven't lost my Vorthon identity. I've gained a galactic perspective that makes me a better leader." He gestured toward the dining area, where their children could be heard laughing together. "Your children aren't losing their cultures. They're learning that culture can be preserved and shared simultaneously, that being Kraltech doesn't require hating Vixani, and that their species' contributions to the galaxy are valuable enough to share with others." The room fell silent as parents processed this perspective. Finally, an elderly Kraltech woman spoke. "But what happens when they leave here? The galaxy outside doesn't think like they do." Marcus smiled. "That's exactly the point. When they leave here, they'll change the galaxy. Your children are the first generation in history to grow up believing that cooperation between species is normal. When they become leaders, scientists, artists, and parents themselves, they'll create a galaxy where war between species becomes unthinkable." As the meeting concluded, Marcus realized that the program had evolved beyond his wildest imagination. He had started by feeding hungry children. He was ending up raising the first truly galactic generation in history. 5 years after the first kitchen opened on Kepler 442b, Marcus found himself standing before the largest gathering in galactic history. The Grand Assembly of Worlds had convened on Nexus Prime to address what historians were already calling the integration generation phenomenon. Representatives from over 800 worlds filled the massive amphitheater, with billions more watching across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. The Galactic Refugee Integration Network now operated 1,247 facilities across 89 worlds, serving over 12 million beings daily. More importantly, the first graduates of the program were reaching adulthood and entering universities, joining the workforce, and beginning to reshape galactic society in ways no one had anticipated. Director Chen, the Grand Assembly moderator, announced, "Please present your comprehensive report on the Integration Generation Project." Marcus activated the central holographic display, showing a galaxy-wide map with streaming data points. Honored representatives, what began as a simple effort to feed hungry children has fundamentally altered the trajectory of galactic civilization. The first slide showed comparative statistics that still amazed him. Refugees processed through traditional assistance programs show a 67% integration rate into host societies within 10 years. Integration generation participants show a 94% integration rate within 3 years. More significantly, 89% of our graduates report maintaining close friendships across species lines, compared to 12% in the general population. A ripple of amazement moved through the assembly. Interspecies friendship had historically been rare, limited mostly to diplomatic and scientific circles. But the most remarkable development, Marcus continued, is entirely unplanned. Integration generation graduates are creating new forms of art, science, and philosophy that could never have emerged from single-species thinking. The display shifted to show examples, architectural designs that incorporated gravitational manipulation from ethereal science with Thraxian geological stability and Zephyrian aesthetic principles. Musical compositions that blended harmonic patterns from species with entirely different auditory ranges. Mathematical theorems that combined computational approaches from various civilizations to solve problems that had stumped single-species researchers for centuries. These young people aren't just integrating into existing societies, Marcus explained. They're creating new possibilities for what galactic civilization can become. Prince Kelvarin, now serving as the youngest member ever appointed to the Galactic Council, stood to address the assembly. At 22, he commanded respect across species lines in ways that would have been impossible for previous generations. Honored representatives, the prince began, I stand before you as living proof of this program's impact. I was raised to rule the Vorthon homeworld and serve in this council with traditional diplomatic protocols. Instead, I learned leadership by washing dishes alongside refugee children, cooking meals for beings whose species had been enemies of mine for millennia, and discovering that genuine authority comes from service, not position. He gestured to the gallery, where dozens of integration generation graduates sat as observers. My colleagues and I represent something unprecedented, a generation that sees species diversity as strength rather than source of conflict. We've formed the first multi-species political party in galactic history, the Integration Coalition, dedicated to governance that transcends traditional species-based interests. A stern voice interrupted from the Conquered Alliance section. Prince Kelvaran, while these developments are interesting, some concerns have been raised about cultural preservation. Are we witnessing evolution or extinction of traditional civilizations? It was the question Marcus had been expecting. As integration generation graduates reached adulthood, their hybrid approaches to everything from art to governance had caused anxiety among traditionalist factions across the galaxy. Dr. Yexara, now Director of Cultural Preservation Studies, stood to respond. Counselor Vexhan, our research shows the opposite. Integration generation graduates demonstrate deeper knowledge of their ancestral cultures than control groups. The difference is that they also understand and appreciate other cultures. They're not losing their heritage. They're placing it in a galactic context. She activated a sub-display showing cultural competency assessments. Young Thraxians in our program scored 23% higher on traditional Thraxian cultural knowledge tests than their traditionally educated peers. They also score highly on tests of Zephyrian, Vorthan, and human cultural knowledge. Cultural preservation and cultural appreciation are not mutually exclusive. Marcus stepped forward again. Furthermore, we're seeing the emergence of what anthropologists are calling metacultures. Integration generation graduates are creating new traditions that honor their ancestral heritage while building connections across species lines. The display showed documentation of new holiday celebrations that blended elements from multiple cultures, wedding ceremonies that incorporated rituals from all participants' backgrounds, and coming-of-age traditions that recognized both species-specific maturation and galactic citizenship. These young people aren't abandoning their cultures, Marcus explained. They're proving that culture can be both preserved and shared, that traditions can evolve without being lost, and that diversity becomes stronger when it's celebrated rather than segregated. An unexpected voice joined the discussion from the observer gallery. Lyra, the Zephyrian girl who had been among Marcus's first regular visitors, now stood as a recognized expert in interspecies linguistics and cultural exchange. Honored assembly, she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had grown up believing that her perspective mattered. "I request permission to speak on behalf of the integration generation." The Grand Assembly moderator, clearly intrigued, granted permission. Lyra moved to the central floor, joined by the Quillen twins, Zix, and several other graduates Marcus recognized from various facilities. "We are not lost between cultures," Lyra declared, speaking for her generation with passionate clarity. "We are not confused about our identities. We are not diluted versions of our ancestors. We are the synthesis of galactic civilization's greatest achievements, carrying forward the best of every tradition while building something unprecedented." One of the Quillen twins stepped forward. "We've been asked if we consider ourselves Quillen or something else. The question itself misses the point. We are Quillen and we are galactic citizens, and we are individuals who happen to understand that differences in biology, culture, and perspective make collaboration stronger, not weaker." Zix addressed the assembly next. "Our parents feared we would forget where we came from. Instead, we've learned where we're going. We carry our ancestral traditions forward not as museum pieces, but as living contributions to a galactic culture that includes everyone." The young graduates spoke for another hour, answering questions, sharing perspectives, and demonstrating the sophisticated thinking that Marcus had watched develop over years of shared meals and collaborative projects. They weren't just articulate, they were visionary, describing possibilities for galactic cooperation that previous generations had never imagined. When the session concluded, the Grand Assembly voted on a resolution that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. Formal recognition of the integration generation as a new model for galactic citizenship, with full support for expanding the program to all refugee populations galaxy-wide. As representatives filed out, many stopping to speak with integration generation graduates, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. He had started by feeding hungry children. He had ended up helping create the foundation for a truly unified galactic civilization. Prince Kelvaran approached him as the amphitheater emptied. "Director Chen, on behalf of the integration generation and the galactic future we're building together, thank you for seeing us as individuals worthy of care and respect when we were just scared. Hungry children far from home," Marcus smiled, remembering the shy boy who had helped wash dishes in his kitchen. "You were never just anything, Your Highness. You were always exactly what the galaxy needed, proof that kindness properly applied can change everything." The transformation was complete, but Marcus knew it was also just beginning. The integration generation was reaching adulthood, taking positions of leadership across the galaxy, and applying their collaborative perspectives to challenges that had seemed insurmountable to previous generations. The galaxy would never be the same. 25 years after Marcus Chen first opened his kitchen door to hungry alien children, he stood in the memorial garden on Kepler 442b, now known as Foundation World. The modest apartment where it all began had been preserved as a historical site, surrounded by monuments honoring the integration generation and their impact on galactic civilization. At 78, Marcus moved slowly but with purpose, his hair silver and his hands marked by decades of cooking and caring. Today marked the 25th anniversary of what historians called the first meal, and beings from across the galaxy had come to celebrate. The garden was filled with familiar faces, now aged and accomplished. Prince Kelvaran, now Emperor of Vorth and Chairman of the Galactic Council, stood with his multi-species family, a Zephyrian wife and 3 children who embodied the complete integration their generation had achieved. Lyra served as the galaxy's first interspecies cultural ambassador, her work having established peaceful contact with 12 previously unknown civilizations. The Quillen twins had founded the most successful interstellar trading consortium in history, built on principles of absolute fairness and mutual benefit. But it was the children present that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. The third generation, grandchildren of refugees who had grown up in a galaxy where species cooperation was simply normal. They played together without any awareness that such friendship had once been rare, spoke in casual mixtures of languages their grandparents would never have imagined combining, and approached problems with the assumption that multiple perspectives would always yield better solutions. "Director Chen," a young voice called out. Marcus turned to see a small human girl, perhaps 8 years old, approaching with a carefully wrapped package. "My grandmother asked me to give this to you." Marcus recognized the child's grandmother immediately, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had been one of the first volunteers to help expand his kitchen program. Now the director of the Galactic Institute for Integration Studies, she watched from nearby with tears in her eyes. "What is it?" Marcus asked, kneeling to the child's level. "Grandmother says it's the recipe book you gave her when she first started cooking for refugee children. She said you should have it back because you're the one who really knows what all the recipes mean." Marcus unwrapped the package to find his original handwritten notebook, the one he'd used to record the dietary needs, preferences, and cultural requirements of every child who had visited his kitchen. The pages were worn and stained, filled with margin notes about ingredient substitutions, cooking techniques, and personal observations about each child's personality and growth. "Thank you," he said to the little girl, his voice thick with emotion, "but I think your grandmother should keep this." The recipes belong to everyone now. The formal ceremony began as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden. Emperor Kelveron stepped forward to address the gathered crowd, which included representatives from every known civilization and many who had been unknown when Marcus first started cooking. 25 years ago, the emperor began, a human chef saw hungry children and decided to cook for them. He had no agenda beyond feeding the hungry, no plan beyond providing good food and basic kindness. Today we live in a galaxy transformed by that simple act of compassion. The holographic displays around the garden showed the current state of galactic civilization. War between species had been extinct for over a decade. Trade relationships operated on principles of mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Scientific collaboration had led to breakthrough technologies that no single species could have developed alone. Art, music, and literature had evolved into forms that incorporated the best expressions from hundreds of cultures. The integration generation didn't just solve the refugee crisis, Emperor Kelveron continued. They redefined what it means to be a galactic citizen. They proved that diversity is strength, that cooperation is natural, and that the barriers we thought were permanent were actually choices we could change. Ambassador Lyra spoke next. Her words transmitted simultaneously to every world in the galaxy. "Director Chen, you probably still think you were just cooking soup for hungry kids. But you were actually demonstrating the most powerful force in the universe. The idea that every individual deserves dignity, care, and respect regardless of their species, background, or circumstances." The ceremony continued with presentations from integration generation leaders now serving in governments, universities, and organizations across the galaxy. Each spoke about how their childhood experiences in Marcus's program had shaped their approach to leadership, problem-solving, and community building. As the formal presentations concluded, Marcus found himself surrounded by the original children from his kitchen, now adults with families and careers of their own. They shared stories, laughed about old memories, and marveled at how their simple childhood friendships had become the foundation for galactic transformation. "Mr. Marcus," Zik said, using the name the children had always called him, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't started cooking for us?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that kindness isn't rare. If I hadn't started cooking, someone else would have found a way to help. The galaxy is full of good beings looking for ways to make things better." Emperor Kelveron overheard and shook his head. "With respect, Director Chen, I disagree. The galaxy was full of beings who cared, but you were the one who acted. You were the one who saw us as individuals rather than representatives of our species. You were the one who proved that simple kindness could change everything." As evening approached and the formal ceremony gave way to informal gatherings, Marcus made his way back to his preserved kitchen. The space was small and simple compared to the vast facilities that now operated across the galaxy, but it remained the place where everything had begun. Standing at the stove where he had prepared countless meals, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey his life had taken. He had been a chef who wanted to feed hungry children. He had become the architect of a new form of galactic civilization based on cooperation, respect, and shared community. A soft sound at the door made him turn. Prince Kelveron's youngest child, a 6-year-old boy who was 1/4 Vorthan, 1/4 Zephyrian, 1/4 Quillan, and 1/4 Thraxian, peeked into the kitchen. "Are you cooking?" the boy asked hopefully, speaking in the casual, multi-species pidgin that had become the galaxy's unofficial common language. Marcus smiled, remembering another shy child who had asked similar questions decades earlier. Would you like me to? The boy nodded enthusiastically and scrambled onto one of the stools that had been sized for children of various species. My dad says you make the best soup in the galaxy. Your dad might be a little biased, Marcus laughed, but he began pulling ingredients from the preserved pantry. But I suppose we could make some soup together. Would you like to help? As the boy chatted about his friends from 17 different species, his school projects that involved collaborating with children on distant worlds, and his dreams of becoming a chef who could cook food that made everyone feel at home, Marcus realized that the transformation was truly complete. The galaxy no longer needed integration centers because integration had become natural. Children grew up expecting to have friends from multiple species. Adults worked in multi-species teams without thinking about it, and the barriers that had once seemed permanent had dissolved into distant history. Marcus Chen had set out to feed hungry children. Instead, he had fed a hungry galaxy the most important meal it had ever shared: the discovery that kindness, properly applied, could transform everything. As the soup simmered and the young boy chattered about his day, Marcus understood that his real legacy wasn't the programs, the policies, or the awards. It was this: a galaxy where no child would ever again go hungry for food, friendship, or hope, because someone had once decided that every individual deserved to be cared for, respected, and loved. The work was complete, but it was also eternal, carried forward by every meal shared between species, every friendship formed across cultural boundaries, and every act of kindness that reminded the galaxy of its fundamental truth: they were all better together.